Fewer than 2% of reported school security breaches after hours have ever involved physical intrusion by staff. Yet the rare cases that do exist carry consequences that linger far beyond the immediate incident. This story is the life of a system of terror, a sequence of events that unfolded quietly, grew in subtle escalation, reached a terrifying peak, and left a legacy of caution that would persist long after the final door was locked. The birth of this nightmare began with a structural problem. Schools, like many large buildings, have gaps in security after hours. The architects and administrators, the parents of the system, designed classrooms, hallways, and stairwells for daytime learning, not for night containment. Early prototypes of surveillance involved basic alarms and keyed locks, but human behavior was the unpredictable variable. A design compromise in early institutional security allowed custodians and teaching staff broad access, relying on trust rather than verification, which inadvertently created opportunities for exploitation. In its childhood, the scenario revealed the fragility of assumptions. Students who stayed late for club activities or extra study encountered anomalies, doors slightly ajar, lights flickering in corridors, and the subtle echo of footsteps that were not supposed to be there. Small changes in schedules, clubs running later, janitorial shifts overlapping, magnified the risk. A lesser-known fact from security audits: 85% of intrusions into school buildings after hours occurred during periods when multiple staff members are present, but oversight is dispersed, creating blind spots. As these incidents repeated, patterns emerged. Observers documented behaviors that suggested predatory intent, but without concrete evidence, early warnings were often dismissed. Misunderstandings were common. Shadows misidentified, noises misattributed, but they became training moments for vigilance. A test result from early behavioral studies showed that children and adolescents were significantly more sensitive to subtle environmental cues than adults, noticing irregularities that would later provide early warning of genuine threat. Growth occurred as the system of intrusion, observation, and intervention matured. Security logs were standardized, motion sensors and cameras expanded, keycard access replaced older locks, rules were formalized, specific times for building access, procedures for reporting anomalies, and mandatory check-ins for staff working late. A production issue arose as multiple campuses installed the same type of door locks, yet manuals differed slightly from building to building, creating moments of confusion where unauthorized access could occur. During the peak, the terror became tangible. A single student, staying late for study, discovered staff engaged in behavior that violated all norms of safety and humanity. Rapid observation, careful retreat, and the activation of the alert system became the immediate survival strategy. A lesser-known countermeasure developed from emergency response training. When confronted with unexpected threats in confined spaces, the priority is observation, documentation, and controlled withdrawal rather than immediate confrontation, reducing risk while preserving evidence. The cost of such a system was severe. Fear permeated routine activities. Fatigue from late study sessions became compounded by hypervigilance. Psychological effects included distrust, insomnia, and hyperalertness in previously safe spaces. Medical research on trauma in confined institutional environments shows that repeated exposure to threat, even when non-physical, can alter stress response systems and cognitive function, sometimes permanently. Old age arrived as security technology and oversight evolved. Cameras, remote monitoring, and automated alerts reduced dependence on human presence alone. Staff training included behavioral risk assessment, emergency drills, and psychological preparedness for anomalies. A command doctrine shift in institutional safety emphasized accountability. No one person could be assumed trustworthy without verification, and systems were designed to minimize human error and potential exploitation. The legacy of the events and the lessons learned persists. Security protocols across educational facilities now integrate technological surveillance with behavioral oversight, emergency procedures, and psychological support. Later designs of campus security, access control, and reporting systems copied these measures globally. At the quiet moral line, the biography of this system reminds us that structures, rules, and trust can fail, but observation, vigilance, and ethical response are enduring human defenses. Buildings, like doctrines, live in both their design and their use. When that balance fails, the consequences are written into the memory of those who survived. By the time the scenario had progressed beyond its initial birth, every corridor and classroom became part of a living system, an environment that demanded attention even when empty. Students and staff alike learned that routine procedures, lights, locks, schedules, were not just formalities, but the first lines of defense. Even small deviations, doors left ajar, keys misplaced, unusual shadows could ripple through the system, creating moments of vulnerability that would be critical later. A lesser-known fact from institutional design: in multi-story educational buildings, air pressure differences between floors can cause doors to swing unexpectedly, creating false signals of presence that confuse both humans and automated sensors. In its childhood, the system revealed the importance of observation and reporting. Early incidents were often misinterpreted: a misplaced textbook, a shadow on a wall, a strange echo in a stairwell. Volunteers, students staying late for clubs or study sessions, frequently misread signs of real threat for harmless anomalies. These small misunderstandings produced valuable lessons, teaching the importance of careful documentation and disciplined movement. A test result from early safety audits showed that hallway lighting intensity below 50 lux increased error rates in visual recognition tasks by over 30%, highlighting how small environmental factors could amplify risk perception. The growth phase expanded the system into a more structured set of practices. Security personnel were trained in observation and incident documentation. Motion sensors, key card access, and emergency communication lines were installed and monitored systematically. Each classroom, corridor, and stairwell became mapped in procedures for both safety and rapid response. A production issue emerged when disparate campuses adopted slightly different access control systems, creating a scenario where rules on one floor did not fully align with others, which introduced opportunities for human error. During the peak of the system, a defining incident occurred. A student staying late discovered evidence that staff were engaging in behavior beyond all norms of safety and legality. The student's survival depended on silent observation, careful retreat, and following emergency procedures developed from previous audits. The event demonstrated why vigilance, structured reporting, and procedural redundancy mattered more than any single security measure. A lesser-known countermeasure developed from these scenarios involved predetermined, safe pathways for students and staff to navigate the building while maintaining line of sight to cameras or monitoring points, reducing exposure to potential threats. The cost of such vigilance was constant. Fear became a persistent factor, influencing not only after-hours activity, but daytime behavior. Fatigue, both physical and psychological, accumulated as students learned to scan corridors, check for anomalies, and maintain awareness of exits.
Medical and psychological studies on prolonged exposure to threat show that hypervigilance, insomnia, and heightened stress responses can emerge even when physical harm is not directly inflicted. The subtle trauma of uncertainty often leaves long-lasting effects. As technology evolved, old methods gradually became supplemented by automation. Surveillance systems, motion detection, and alert protocols reduced reliance on human observation alone. Training included psychological readiness, scenario planning, and emergency drills designed to replicate the unpredictability of real incidents. A command doctrine shift emphasized accountability. No single staff member could be implicitly trusted without oversight, and procedures were designed to minimize human error or malfeasance. Remote monitoring and redundant reporting channels became standard practice. Even with these advances, human observation retained unique value. Sensors can detect motion or sound, but they cannot interpret context, intention, or subtleties in behavior, skills that were honed through years of procedural refinement. The legacy of these events transformed the culture of institutional safety. Schools worldwide now combine technological surveillance, procedural oversight, and psychological preparedness to mitigate rare but extreme incidents. Later designs in access control, emergency protocols, and staff monitoring incorporated lessons learned from these rare but consequential breaches. A lesser-known historical insight, comprehensive post-incident reviews often reveal that small, overlooked anomalies, doors left unlocked, minor discrepancies in logbooks, preceded major events by days or weeks, emphasizing the value of meticulous observation. The quiet moral of this life story is that systems, like human behavior, are fragile yet teachable. Structures can fail, trust can be violated, but careful observation, disciplined procedures, and ethical oversight remain enduring lines of defense. Even when the immediate danger passes, the memory of vigilance and structured response persists, influencing design, behavior, and policy for generations. The life story of these systems is not just about danger, it is about the lessons embedded in survival, observation, and responsibility.
Less than 5% of institutional safety failures begin with a dramatic event. Most begin with a sequence of small, ignored anomalies that accumulate over days or weeks. This is the life story of a system that was never meant to exist, a convergence of medical experimentation and institutional failure that unfolded quietly, matured through oversight gaps, reached a point of maximum danger, and left behind a doctrine of caution written not in manuals but in memory. It began with a problem that was not unusual on paper. Schools, particularly those connected with research programs, sometimes host controlled studies involving behavior, nutrition, or cognitive testing. The overlap of education and experimentation has existed for decades, usually under strict regulation. But in rare cases, oversight fragments. Procedures designed for laboratories begin to operate inside environments built for children. A design compromise in institutional planning has long existed between accessibility and control. Schools are designed to be open during the day, navigable by large numbers of students, which inherently limits the rigidity of access control compared with high-security research facilities. The early decisions that shaped this system were administrative rather than dramatic. Permissions granted, spaces repurposed, a classroom becomes a temporary testing site. A staff member takes on dual roles, educator by day, participant in research by evening. None of these decisions appear dangerous in isolation. In some documented cases of mixed-use institutions, role overlap between staff responsibilities increased procedural errors by measurable margins, particularly when accountability chains were unclear. The childhood of this system was defined by misunderstanding. Students noticed small inconsistencies, restricted areas after certain hours, unusual schedules for certain teachers, locked doors that were usually open. These details rarely triggered immediate concern. Human perception tends to normalize patterns unless disruption becomes obvious. A test observation from environmental psychology shows that individuals often ignore repeated anomalies if each one appears minor on its own, a phenomenon known as normalization of deviation. At this stage, the experiment component also evolved. Subjects, sometimes volunteers, sometimes unaware participants in observational studies, were exposed to controlled variables, diet changes, behavioral observation, stress response monitoring. Each of these practices exists legitimately within research frameworks when properly supervised. A production issue occasionally arises in such hybrid environments when equipment designed for laboratories is used in non-standard settings, leading to calibration inconsistencies and unreliable data. The system grew. It did not expand in size as much as in complexity. Procedures layered over each other. Night schedules appeared. Staff movements became less predictable. Maintenance staff, research personnel, and teaching staff began overlapping in ways that blurred boundaries. A supply constraint sometimes encountered in institutional experiments involves limited availability of standardized materials, forcing substitutions that may alter experimental conditions without immediate detection. For a student, the environment still appeared normal during daylight hours. Lessons continued, hallways filled with movement, but systems reveal themselves most clearly when routine disappears. After hours, the structure changes, light fades, sound carries differently, empty spaces amplify presence. A crew training detail from security programs shows that after-hours patrol personnel are taught to rely more on auditory cues than visual ones, because reduced lighting alters depth perception and movement detection. The defining moment, the peak, arrived not as a sudden shock, but as a realization. A student remaining in the building beyond normal hours began to notice patterns aligning, movements that did not match schedules, voices in places where no one should be, behavior that contradicted daytime familiarity. What was discovered was not supernatural, but human, and therefore more unsettling. Actions taken by trusted figures that violated both ethical boundaries and institutional rules. The exact nature of those actions is less important than the system that allowed them to exist. A countermeasure principle in emergency response emphasizes distance and observation. When confronted with unknown threat, immediate withdrawal combined with information gathering increases survival probability. The student's response followed this principle instinctively or by learned behavior. Movement became deliberate, noise minimized, pathways chosen based on visibility and exit access. In confined structures like schools, escape routes are limited. Stairwells, corridors, and exits form predictable pathways. Knowledge of these routes becomes critical. A spatial analysis of school buildings shows that most have between 2 and 4 primary exit routes accessible after hours, depending on security configurations. The system reached its most dangerous state not because of one action, but because of accumulated tolerance. Small anomalies had gone unchallenged, oversight gaps had widened, the structure designed for safety had become a container for risk. The cost of such a system is measured in human response. Fear alters decision-making, heart rate increases, perception sharpens in some ways and distorts in others. Medical research into acute stress responses shows that individuals under sudden threat may experience tunnel vision, reducing peripheral awareness by up to 30%. The student navigating this environment had to manage these physiological effects while making decisions quickly. Movement through corridors required balancing speed and silence, choosing when to hide and when to move. A battlefield improvisation parallel can be drawn from urban operations training, where individuals are taught to use corners, shadows, and line of sight to minimize exposure. Fatigue also played a role. Staying awake beyond normal hours affects cognitive processing. Reaction times slow.
judgment becomes less precise. Studies on sleep deprivation indicate that after approximately 18 hours without rest, cognitive impairment can resemble that of mild intoxication. Despite these limitations, survival depended on maintaining enough clarity to follow a path out of the system. Exit points, alarm triggers, communication devices all became critical elements. A communication countermeasure often emphasized in emergency planning is redundancy. Multiple methods of alerting authorities increase the likelihood of response. Eventually, the system encountered external intervention. Reports, alarms, or discovery by authorities brought the hidden structure into view. Investigations followed. A command doctrine shift typically occurs after such incidents, focusing on accountability and layered oversight. No single individual or process is left unchecked. The old system entered decline. Access controls tightened, monitoring increased, roles separated clearly between education and research functions. Technological upgrades often accompany such shifts. Surveillance systems improve, logging becomes digital, access records are stored and reviewed. A design improvement in modern institutional security involves integrating access logs with real-time alerts, allowing anomalies to be flagged immediately rather than discovered later. The replacement system is rarely perfect, but it addresses the vulnerabilities that allowed the previous one to exist. Training programs evolve, staff receive updated guidelines, students are educated about reporting irregularities. The legacy remains complex. Policies change not because of theory, but because of lived incidents. Each failure contributes to a broader understanding of risk. A medical and psychological effect observed in survivors of such environments is long-term hyper-awareness, where individuals continue scanning for threats even in safe conditions. The building itself returns to normal function. Classrooms reopen. Hallways fill again with routine activity. But memory alters perception. Spaces once neutral now carry meaning. The final lesson of this life story is quiet and precise. Systems do not fail all at once, they drift. And survival, in the rare moment when drift becomes danger, depends less on strength and more on attention, on noticing what does not fit and acting before it becomes something that cannot be undone.